When the most feared man in New York's underworld needed a fake wife to secure a billion-dollar syndicate deal, he expected a quiet, compliant model. Instead, he got Clara, a fiercely confident, plus-size force of nature who didn't just play the part. She rewrote the script. She walked into a room full of loaded weapons and fragile egos, and by dessert, she had the entire Mafia eating out of the palm of her hand. Here is their story. Dominic Moretti did not ask for favors. He demanded compliance. As the undisputed head of the Moretti syndicate, his life was a meticulously constructed empire of loyalty, fear, and unparalleled wealth. He wore bespoke Brunei suits that masked the brutal realities of his profession. And he commanded a network that stretched from the concrete canyons of Wall Street to the shipping ports of New Jersey. But as he stood in the sprawling, glass-walled living room of his Tribeca penthouse, staring down at the rain-sicked streets of Manhattan, Dominic faced a problem that a loaded weapon and a blank check could not easily solve. Vincenzo Costa was arriving from Polmo in exactly 48 hours. Costa was a man of the old world, a traditionalist who controlled the most lucrative distribution pipelines in Europe. He refused to do business with bachelors, playboys, or men he deemed unsettled. To Costa, a man without a wife was a man without a future, an unpredictable liability. To secure the transatlantic shipping contract that would legitimize the Moretti family's holdings for the next century, Dominic needed to present himself as a devoted, grounded family man. He needed a wife, not a girlfriend, not an escort, but a formidable, elegant woman who could convince a paranoid Sicilian Dawn that Dominic was building a dynasty. Leo, Dominic's right-hand man, was sweating through his Tom Ford shirt. For 3 days, Leo had paraded a carousel of hopefuls through the penthouse. Actresses, socialites, runway models, all of them beautiful, all of them terrifyingly fragile. They either flirted too aggressively, completely unaware of the lethal stakes, or they trembled the moment Dominic walked into the room, their eyes darting to the armed guards stationed at the mahogany doors. The final candidate, a statuesque blonde named Sophia, had just fled the penthouse in hysterics. She had snagged her silk dress on a sharp edge of a glass table, ruining the garment. And when Dominic had simply looked at her with his characteristic dead-eyed impatience, she had burst into tears and quit the charade entirely. "She's gone, boss," Leo muttered, running a hand over his face. "I can make some more calls. I know a girl down in Soho." "No more girls, Leo," Dominic snapped, his voice a low, grolly baritone that made the air in the room feel heavy. Costa isn't an idiot. He will see right through some trembling 22-year-old whose only ambition is an unlimited tab at Bergdorf Goodman. I need a woman with gravity, a woman who looks like she could run this family if I caught a bullet tomorrow. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse swung open, interrupting the tense silence. "Well, you owe me $400 for the emergency call-out, and since your runway princess is currently sobbing in the elevator, I assume the fitting is cancelled." Dominic turned slowly. Standing in the foyer, shaking a wet floral-patterned umbrella onto his pristine marble floor, was a woman who completely defied the aesthetic of his meticulously curated world. Clara Higgins was Leo's cousin, highly sought theatrical wardrobe mistresses who practically ran the backstage chaos of Broadway's biggest shows. She was also undeniably, unapologetically fat. She did not attempt to hide her size behind drab colors or shapeless sacks. Instead, she commanded the room in a vibrant, oversized vintage Chanel trench coat in a striking shade of mustard yellow. Her dark curly hair was pinned up in a messy but deliberate twist, and her full rouged lips were pressed into a tight line of pure annoyance. She carried a heavy leather sewing kit that looked like it had survived a war. "Clara," Leo hissed, his eyes darting nervously to his boss. "You can't just walk in here." I buzzed. "Your security goons let me up because they know I'm the only one who can fix a torn, bias-cut silk hem in under 20 minutes. Clara Ara fired back, not even looking at Leo. Her sharp, intelligent eyes locked directly onto Dominic. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. She looked at the city's most dangerous man the same way she looked at a misbehaving chorus boy. "I don't care who you are or what kind of intimidation racket you're running here. My time is valuable." Dominic stepped forward, intrigued. He was a man who stood 6'3", built like a heavyweight fighter, and he was used to people physically shrinking away from him. Clara Ara stood her ground. Her soft, heavy curves were planted firmly, her chin tilted up in defiance. There was an undeniable warmth and power radiating from her, a grounding presence that immediately sucked the frantic, panicked energy out of the room. "You're Leo's cousin," Dominic stated, his dark eyes analyzing her. "And you're the man who makes grown women cry over a ripped hem," Clara Ara counted smoothly. She unbuttoned her trench coat, revealing a tailored emerald green wrap dress that hugged her full bust and wide hips beautifully. She was completely comfortable in her own skin, moving with a grace that belied the heavy anxiety of the men surrounding her. "Since there's no dress to fix, I'll be taking my fee and leaving. Cash preferred." Dominic didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile crept onto his face. He walked closer to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive Cohiba cigars, rain, and danger. Clara Ara simply arched an eyebrow, refusing to step back. "Are you afraid of me, Clara Ara?" Dominic asked softly. "I routinely manage 50 exhausted, ego-driven actors during a quick change, while a live orchestra plays." Clara Ara replied dryly, crossing her plump arms over her chest. "You are just a man in a very expensive suit with a scowl. So, no, I'm not afraid of you." Dominic turned to Leo. "Cancel the other calls." Leo blinked, thoroughly confused. "Boss, we still need a wife for the Costa dinner." Dominic looked back down at Clara Ara, admiring the fierce, unyielding fire in her eyes, the proud set of her full jaw, and the absolute lack of pretense in her posture. She was real. She had weight, substance, and a mind sharp enough to slice through glass. Costa wanted a formidable woman. He was looking at one. "We don't need to make any more calls," Dominic said, his gaze never leaving Clarice. "We already found her." Clara Ara stared at the heavy, embossed check sitting on the glass coffee table. The number written on it in Dominic's sharp, aggressive handwriting was enough to buy a brownstone in Brooklyn outright. $2 million, Clara Ara said slowly, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She sat opposite Dominic, on a low, plush velvet sofa, her heavy leather sewing kit resting by her feet, tax-free, transferred to an offshore account of your choosing the morning after Vincenzo Costa signs the contract. Dominic confirmed. He leaned back in his leather armchair, swirling a finger of amber Macallan whiskey in a crystal glass. He was watching her intently, studying the way she processed the information. And for this, I have to pretend to be deeply in love with a man who likely has bodies buried in New Jersey. Smile at a Sicilian Mafia, dawn over a plate of osuko, and convince him that you are a domesticated, trustworthy family man. Clara Ara picked up the check, folding it precisely in half. It's not enough. Leo, standing by the door, choked on his own breath. Clara Ara, are you out of your mind? That's 2 million. I heard the number. Lo, Clara Ara interrupted, her tone sharp. She looked at Dominic, her dark eyes completely serious. If Costa is as smart and paranoid as you say he is, he will do a background check. He will see that I am not a runway model. He will see that I am a fat, working-class theatrical designer from Queens. You need a narrative that makes sense. We can't just pretend we met at a charity gala. What do you suggest? Dominic asked, genuinely fascinated. Nobody negotiated with him. Nobody pushed back. We met 8 years ago. Clara Ara lied seamlessly, leaning forward, her full breasts pressing against the emerald silk of her dress. You bumped into me outside a bakery in Little Italy. We argued. You liked that I yelled at you. We dated in secret because your world was too dangerous. But you never let me go. We reconnected 6 months ago, and you finally realized you couldn't live without me. It explains why I'm not some polished mob wife clone. It explains why I'm different. Dominic's lips twitched into a genuine smile. You're a very good liar, Clara Ara. I work in theatre, she replied smoothly. Now to the terms. I get full creative control over my wardrobe and my styling. I will not have your syphants trying to squeeze me into shapewear that cuts off my circulation. And I will not be told to wear black because it's slimming. If I am going to play the wife of Dominic Moretti, I am going to take up space. Agreed, Dominic said, setting his glass down. He liked the way she spoke. He liked her demand for respect. What else? I want a guarantee in writing that once this dinner is over and Costa is gone, I walk away. No strings, no lingering associations with your business. I don't want to look over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Dominic held her gaze for a long moment. The vulnerability hidden beneath her armor was faint, but he saw it. You have my word, and in my world, my word is far more binding than a piece of paper. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Dominic had initially summoned a team of elite personal shoppers from Fifth Avenue. But the moment the lead stylist held up a drab, structured navy blue shift dress and suggested it would minimize her waist, Clara Ara fired them all. She practically chased them out of the penthouse, her booming voice echoing off the marble. Instead, she called in her own favors. Within hours, her trusted colleagues from the theatre district arrived with garment bags. When Dominic walked into the master suite the evening of the dinner, he stopped dead in his tracks. Clara Ara was standing in front of the floor, toesiling mirror, and she looked magnificent. She had chosen a custom-draped crimson silk gown by a brilliant, independent designer she knew. The dress didn't hide her body. It celebrated it. The heavy, rich fabric clung beautifully to her wide hips, cinched elegantly at her waist, and featured an off-the-shoulder neckline that displayed her soft, creamy shoulders and full cleavage. Her hair was swept to one side in dramatic, glamorous waves, and her makeup was classic, a sharp, winged eyeliner and a deep red lip that matched the dress perfectly. She didn't look like a woman trying to shrink herself to fit into a mafia boss's world. She looked like a queen who already owned it. "You look," Dominic started, his voice suddenly thick, losing its usual cold edge. "Don't sound so surprised, Dominic," Clara Ara said, turning to face him. The sheer volume of her presence in the room was intoxicating. "I told you. If we're doing this, we do it my way." Dominic slowly closed the distance between them. He was wearing a pitch-black tuxedo that made him look like a shadow cast by a very dangerous fire. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Hold out your hand," he murmured, standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his broad chest. Clara Ara extended her left hand. Her fingers were plump and soft. Dominic opened the box to reveal a massive, flawless, emerald-cut graph diamond ring. It was heavy, ostentatious, and incredibly beautiful. Very gently, his calloused, scarred fingers took hers. The contrast between his rough, violent hands and her soft, warm skin made Clara Ara's breath hitch in her throat. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "I had Leo raid the vault," Dominic said quietly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. He didn't let go of her hand immediately. He looked down at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Tonight, you answer to no one but me. And if Costa or any of his men look at you with anything less than absolute respect, I will carve their eyes out. Understood?" Clara Ara felt a shiver race down her spine that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. "Understood." "Good," Dominic whispered, offering her his arm. "Let's go steal $1 billion. Clara Ara looped her arm through his, feeling the solid muscle beneath his tuxedo jacket. As they walked out of the penthouse and toured the waiting armored Maybach, Clara Ara realized one terrifying truth. Playing the part of Dominic Moretti's wife was going to be dangerously easy. The armored Maybach glided through the rain-swept streets of Manhattan, pulling to a silent halt outside the discreet, unmarked entrance of a private dining club in the West Village. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of white truffles, aged balsamic, and the heavy, unspoken tension of absolute power. Dominic stepped out first, the rain slicking his dark hair as he turned to offer Clara Ara his hand. When she emerged, the crimson silk of her custom gown contrasting violently with the damp grey night, the murmurs of the valet and stationed security guards fell instantly dead. Clara Ara did not rush. She stepped onto the pavement with the deliberate, grounded poise of a woman who knew her exact worth. She linked her arm through Dominic's, feeling the rigid tension in his bicep. "Breathe, Dominic," Clara Ara murmured, her voice barely carrying over the patter of the rain. "If you walk in there looking like you're heading to an execution, Costa will smell blood in the water. We are in love, remember? We are celebrating. Dominic looked down at her, his dark, calculating eyes widening fractionally. He was the boss of the Moretti family. No one told him to breathe. Yet the steady, warm weight of her hand against his side acted as an anchor. He let out a slow exhale, his broad shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. You are entirely too calm for a woman walking into a room full of loaded guns. I survived a tech rehearsal of Les Miserables with a director who threw folding chairs. Clara Ara replied, flashing a brilliant, unfazed smile. Mobsters are just theatre kids with better tailoring and worse tempers. They entered the subterranean, private dining room. Vincenzo Costa sat at the head of a long, heavy oak table, flanked by 4 men whose suits bulged slightly at the ribs. Costa was in his late 60s. A hawk-faced Sicilian with cold, rheumy eyes that had seen decades of betrayals and bloodshed. Next to him sat his nephew, Lorenzo, a slick, arrogant underboss with a penchant for flashy Rolexes and cruel jokes. When Dominic and Clara Ara approached, Costa did not immediately stand. His eyes locked onto Clara Ara, analyzing her with a ruthlessness that would have made a weaker woman shatter. He took in her soft, wide curves, the unapologetic boldness of the red dress, and the massive Graf diamond catching the low candlelight. He was looking for a crack, a tremor, a sign of the terrified escort Leo usually procured. Clara Ara gave him none. Instead of waiting for Dominic to introduce her, she stepped forward, extending her plump, manicured hand with a warm, commanding, "Don Costa?" Clara Ara said, her voice rich and carrying perfectly through the quiet room. "Dominic has told me so much about your legendary cellars in Pulmo. It is an absolute honor." Costa blinked, surprised by her initiative. He slowly stood, taking her hand and brushing a dry kiss over her knuckles. "Signora Moretti, I must confess, I did not expect Dominic to find a woman of such formidable presence." Lorenzo, the nephew, snickered under his breath. Yes, Dominic always did have a massive appetite. It seems he indulges it at home now, too. The room temperature plummeted. Dominic's hand twitched toward the inside of his jacket, a murderous rage flashing across his face. But before he could draw breath to order Lorenzo's execution, Clara Ara laughed. It was a rich, throaty, genuine sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Oh, Lorenzo, isn't it?" Clara Ara said, turning her sharp gaze to the younger man. She looked him up and down, her eyes pausing on his overly tight, shiny suit jacket. "It's true. My husband loves a woman with substance. He prefers a feast, while it seems you." She paused, gesturing gracefully toward Lorenzo's slight frame. "And poorly tailored shoulders are accustomed to surviving on scraps. Perhaps that's why your lapels are buckling. A good tour knows you need extra canvas in the chest to project authority, rather than just hoping a shiny fabric will do the work for you." Silence slammed into the room. Dominic froze. Costa's guards shifted nervously. Then Costa threw his head back and let out a booming, rusted roar of laughter. He slammed his hand on the oak table, delighted. "A lioness. Dominic, you brought a lioness to my table. She has the eyes of a hawk and the tongue of a viper." Costa glared at his nephew, who was turning a furious, mottled shade of red. "Sit down, Lorenzo, and shut your mouth. The Signora just taught you a lesson in presence. The dinner that followed was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, and Clara Ara played the maestro. She didn't just sit there looking pretty. She steered the conversation. When Costa tried to test Dominic by dropping rapid-fire localized Sicilian dialect about shipping logistics, Clara Ara seamlessly interjected. "My apologies, Don Costa." She lied beautifully, sipping her Barolo wine. But when Dominic and I were staying in Catania last summer, the harbour masters there complained of the exact same union delays. Dominic handled it by restructuring the night shifts. "Isn't that right, darling?" She placed a warm hand over Dominic's. Dominic, catching her flawless volley, leaned into the lie. "Exactly. It cut our overhead by 15%. The docks in Polmo could benefit from the same structure." Costa leaned forward, utterly captivated. For 2 hours, Clara Ara ate heartily, drank deeply, and laughed genuinely. She regaled them with fabricated stories of how she and Dominic fought over Sunday gravy recipes, painting a picture of a grounded, passionate, and unshakable partnership. She did not hide her appetite, savoring the rich, braised short ribs and fresh burrata, proving she was entirely comfortable in her own skin and in their dangerous world. By the time the espresso was served, Costa was looking at Dominic not as a volatile young boss, but as a seasoned leader anchored by a brilliant, powerful wife. The billion-dollar contract sitting inside a leather folio on a side table seemed like a mere formality. "You are a lucky man, Dominic," Costa said softly, swirling his sambuca. "A man with a wife like this, he is a man who builds empires." "I am ready to sign." Dominic looked at Clara Ara. The pride swelling in his chest was foreign, heavy, and intensely real. She hadn't just played the part, she had completely conquered the room. But as the waiter stepped forward to clear the final plates, Clara Ara's theatrical training kicked in, and the evening took a violent turn. In the theatre, a wardrobe mistress survives by noticing the details everyone else misses. Clara Ara's brain was wired to spot the fraying hem of a chorus-lined skirt from 50 feet away, or the wrong pair of shoes on a principal actor mere seconds before the curtain rose. As the waiter approached the head of the table, carrying a silver tray bearing Costa's final drink and a heavy humidor of cigars, Clara Ara's eyes locked onto his hands. His grip was completely wrong. A trained server at an elite establishment balances a tray on the fingertips of one hand, keeping the other behind the back. This man was gripping the edges of the silver tray with white-knuckled intensity. Worse, Clara Ara's gaze drifted to his uniform. The vest was standard issue, but the trousers were a heavy tactical twill, not the lightweight wool blend worn by the rest of the staff. And peeking out from beneath his polished left shoe was a thick rubberized combat sole designed for silent movement and heavy traction. Not sliding across a dining room floor, the man wasn't a waiter. As he stepped behind Costa's chair, his right hand slipped away from the tray, sliding smoothly beneath the tailored vest toward his waistband. Clara Ara didn't think. There was no time to scream, no time to warn Dominic, in a room where a single misinterpreted word meant a bloodbath. Relying on the pure, unadulterated weight of her body and the element of surprise, Clara Ara stood up violently. "Oh my God, the rat!" Clara Ara shrieked at the top of her lungs, pointing at the floor directly behind the fake waiter. In the same explosive movement, she hooked her foot around the heavy leg of her dining chair and shoved it backward with all her might. The heavy wooden chair slammed directly into the knees of the assassin just as he drew a silenced, semi-automatic pistol from his belt. The man buckled, his shot going wild. The bullet shattered the crystal chandelier above the table, raining glass down on the plates. Chaos erupted. Clara Ara grabbed the edge of the heavy oak table and threw her entire weight backward, dragging the tablecloth, the fine china, the wine glasses, and the heavy silver centerpieces directly into the assassin's path, burying him in a cascade of debris and scalding espresso. "Gun!" Dominic roared, his instincts taking over instantly. He lunged over the table, tackling Clara Ara to the floor and shielding her body with his massive frame. In a fraction of a second, the room transformed into a war zone. Costa's guards drew their weapons, but Leo and Dominic's men were faster. 2 deafening shots rang out in the confined space, followed by the heavy thud of the fake waiter hitting the floor. Neutralized, silence snapped back into the room, broken only by the tinkling of settling glass and the heavy, ragged breathing of the men. Dominic was hovering over Clara Ara, his hands frantically checking her face, her shoulders, the crimson silk of her dress. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a sledgehammer. The mask of the cold, calculated Mafia boss had completely shattered, replaced by raw, naked panic. "Clara Ara," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Clara Ara, are you hit? Talk to me." Clara Ara blinked up at him, her chest heaving. Her beautiful updo had collapsed, dark curls framing her face, and her dress was splashed with spilled wine. But her eyes were clear and sharp. I'm fine, Dominic. He's down." Slowly, Dominic helped her to her feet, keeping a protective arm tightly around her thick waist. He refused to let her go. Across the room, Vincenzo Costa was staring at the dead man on the floor, then slowly raised his eyes to Clara Ara. The old dawn brushed a piece of shattered crystal off his lapel. The assassin was a known hitter from the rival Calabrian faction. A man sent to destabilize the entire East Coast by wiping out Costa and Moretti in one stroke. Costa looked at Clara Ara, who was currently adjusting her torn dress with the annoyed pragmatism of a woman inspecting a ruined costume. She saw him. Costa whispered absolute awe in his growly voice. He stepped over the debris, ignoring his panicked nephew, and walked directly to Clara Ara. "Before my guards, before my own eyes, your wife saw the blade in the grass." "I know a bad costume when I see one," Clara Ara said, her voice shaking only slightly. His trousers didn't match the vest, and waiters don't wear tactical boots. Costa reached out and gripped Dominic's shoulder with bruising force. "I wanted proof that you were a man who could protect his investments, Dominic. You have brought me a woman who protects the protector. The Calabrians will pay for this. But tonight," Costa gestured to Leo, who was holding the leather folio against his chest like a shield. "Tonight we sign. I do not do business with men. I do business with families. And the Moretti family is made of iron." 30 minutes later, The billion-dollar contract was signed in a secured back office. The police were handled by Dominic's sprawling payroll. The mess swept under the rug of underworld privilege. When they finally climbed back into the armored Maybach, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a heavy, exhausted silence in its wake. Clara Ara kicked off her ruined heels, sighing as she rubbed her aching temples. Dominic sat beside her in the dark. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't celebrating. He was staring at her with an intensity that made the air in the car feel impossibly thin. The $2 million check, the fake story, the wardrobe. It had all been a transaction, a business deal, but as Dominic looked at the fat, fiercely beautiful woman who had just hurled herself into the line of fire to save his life, the transactional nature of their agreement evaporated into the night air. He reached across the leather seat and took her hand, his thumb tracing the heavy graph diamond on her finger. "The deal is done," Clara Ara whispered, looking down at his scarred hand holding hers. "You got your shipping routes?" "Yes," Dominic replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from hers, the scent of gunpowder and rain clinging to his skin. "But the terms of our contract just changed, Clara Ara, because there is no force on this earth that is going to make me let you walk away." The interior of the Maybach was as silent as a tomb, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the tinted bulletproof glass. Clara Ara stared at Dominic, the sheer gravity of his words hanging in the narrow space between them. "There is no force on this earth that is going to make me let you walk away." For a fleeting second, the pragmatic, fiercely independent theater professional in her wanted to laugh, to remind him of the $2 million and the ironclad verbal contract they had struck just 24 hours ago. But as she looked into Dominic's dark, fathomless eyes, the humor died in her throat. The cold, calculating mob boss who had evaluated her like a piece of strategic real estate was gone. In his place was a man stripped down to his rawest, most dangerous instincts. A predator who had found something precious and was mentally preparing to go to war to keep it. "A contract is a contract, Dominic," Clara Ara said, her voice softer than she intended, though she did not pull her hand away from his heavy grip. "You promised me a clean break. The dinner is over. Cost assigned. Cost assigned because he believes you are my wife," Dominic countered, his thumb continuing its slow, mesmerizing sweep over the knuckles of her left hand, where the heavy graph diamond caught the street lights flashing past the window. "And tonight, in front of the entire East Coast underworld, you threw a table at a Calabrian hitman to save my life. Do you honestly think you can just go back to a wardrobe department in Queens tomorrow? You are on the board now, Clara Ara. You are a known entity. A cold spike of reality pierced through the fading adrenaline." Clara Ara's breath hitched as the logistical nightmare of her new reality settled in. She wasn't just a fake date anymore to the rival factions. She was the lioness who had humiliated an assassin and secured the Moretti family a billion-dollar empire. "So what are you saying?" Clara Ara asked, her heart hammering against her ribs, her full breasts rising and falling rapidly against the torn crimson silk of her gown. "That I'm your prisoner. I am saying you are my priority. Dominic replied fiercely, leaning closer until the scent of his cologne and the faint, acrid smell of gunpowder enveloped her completely. I will not put you in a gilded cage, Clara Ara, but I will not let you out of my sight until the Calabrian threat is buried. And even then, he paused, his gaze dropping to her soft, parted lips before rising to meet her eyes again. Even then, I don't think I could let you go. The car glided into the secure underground garage of his Tribeca building. When the heavy steel doors closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world, Dominic finally released her hand, though the absence of his touch left a phantom burn on her skin. Up in the penthouse, the silence was deafening. Leo and the security detail remained in the outer corridors, giving the boss a wide berth. Clara Ara kicked off her ruined heels the moment she stepped onto the marble floor. A heavy sash delay escaping her lips. She felt the sudden, crushing weight of the evening in her bones. She turned to head toward the guest suite, desperate to peel off the restrictive wine-stained silk, when she noticed the dark crimson stain blooming on the sleeve of Dominic's white tuxedo shirt. He had removed his jacket and cast it onto an armchair, moving with a stiff, unnatural rigidity. "You're bleeding," Clara Ara stated, her theatrical instincts overriding her exhaustion in her world. An injured crew member meant the show stopped until they were patched up. Dominic glanced at his left bicep with mild irritation, as if a stray bullet fragment was merely a nuisance. "It's just a graze from the chandelier glass." "It's nothing. Sit down," Clara Ara ordered, her voice booming with the exact same authority she used to command 50 chaotic actors during a quick change. "Now!" Dominic blinked, genuinely taken aback. Men twice his age and size trembled before him. Yet this spectacular plump woman in a ruined gown was pointing at a leather sofa as if he were a disobedient child. To his own profound surprise, he obeyed. He sank onto the heavy leather cushions, watching in silent fascination as Clara Ara disappeared into the expansive master bathroom. Returning a moment later with a fully stocked first aid kit, she stood between his spread knees, bringing her intoxicating warmth and the soft, expansive curve of her hips right into his eye line. She didn't hesitate. Her deft, practical fingers unbuttoned the cuff of his ruined Tom Ford shirt and rolled the bloody fabric up to his shoulder, exposing the thick, corded muscle and a jagged 3-inch gash from a flying shard of crystal. "This is going to sting," she warned, uncapping a bottle of antiseptic. "I've had worse," he murmured, but his attention wasn't on the wound. It was entirely on her. As Clara Ara leaned in to clean the cut, the deep neckline of her dress shifted, and Dominic felt a surge of pure, primal desire that completely eclipsed the throbbing pain in his arm. He raised his uninjured right hand and gently placed it flat against the side of her waist. He didn't grab. He simply rested his palm there, marveling at the soft, lush curve of her body. For a man who lived in a world of sharp edges, lethal precision, and skeletal, fragile women, Clara Ara's absolute solidity was the most grounding sensation he had ever experienced. Clara Ara froze as his large, calloused hand spanned the curve of her hip. She looked down, her dark eyes locking with his. "I meant what I said in the car, Clara Ara," Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with an intense, quiet vulnerability that no one in his syndicate had ever witnessed. I have spent my entire life building walls, acquiring power, and trusting absolutely no one. Then you walked into my penthouse, yelled at my men, demanded your worth, and proved you possessed more courage in your little finger than half my capos. He slid his hand slowly upward, his thumb tracing the soft swell of her rib cage just beneath her breast, feeling the frantic, fluttering rhythm of her heart. I don't want the fake story, Dominic confessed, pulling her gently by the waist until she was forced to drop the antiseptic pad and brace her hands against his broad, muscular shoulders. I don't want a business arrangement. I want the reality. I want you taking up every inch of space in my life. Clara Ara swallowed hard, her practical mind struggling against the intoxicating heat of his touch. Dominic, this is insane. We live in two entirely completely universes. I pin hems and organize costume racks. You run an underworld empire, then rule it with me, he challenged, his gaze dropping to her mouth. Before she could form a rational argument, Dominic pulled her down. His mouth crashed into hers, not with the brutal violence of his world, but with a desperate, consuming hunger. Clara Ara gasped against his lips, and that was all the invitation he needed. His good arm wrapped entirely around her thick waist, pulling her heavy, glorious curves flush against his hard chest. The kiss was a revelation, deep, possessive, and electric. Clara Ara's hands instinctively tangled in his dark hair, giving as good as she got, completely surrendering to the chaotic, terrifying thrill of the city's most dangerous man worshipping her body as if she were a goddess. The next morning, the reality of Clara Ara's new existence hit like a freight train. Awaking in Dominic's king-sized bed, she found him gone, leaving only the scent of cedar wood and coffee. Pulling a white robe around her generous frame, she checked her phone. A bank notification flashed. $2,045,000. The offshore wire transfer had cleared. She was a multi-millionaire. She could pack her heavy sewing kit, hail a cab to JFK, and disappear to France. The money was hers, but as she touched her swollen lips, the vivid memory of Dominic's possessive hands on her waist sent a shiver down her spine. Running was impossible. A sharp knock shattered her thoughts. Leo stepped in. His pale face was a stark contrast to his usual slick demeanor. He looked exhausted. "Clara," Leo said, his voice tense. "Dominic needs you in the war room." Now she didn't bother changing. Pulling the thick robe tighter, she marched barefoot down the marble hallway. Her commanding stride made the armed guards step back. When she pushed open the mahogany doors to Dominic's office, the air was thick with tension. Dominic leaned over a digital map of Manhattan, flanked by 4 lieutenants. Seeing Clara Ara, his hardened expression softened. He wrapped a protective arm around her soft shoulders, pressing a proprietary kiss to her temple in front of his men. The unspoken message was clear. She is mine, and she is equal. "What is happening?" Clara Ara asked. "The Calabrians," Dominic growled. "We intercepted chatter. They are deeply humiliated. A civilian thwarted their operative. They've placed a $3 million bounty on the Lioness of Moretti." Clara Ara blinked at the absurdity. "A hit on me. I'm a wardrobe manager. What will they do? Sabotage my sewing machine?" "It's no joke," Leo interjected grimly. "They think you're a highly trained asset. The way you neutralized him, They assume you're an elite contractor. Clara Ara let out an incredulous laugh. He wore rubber-soled tactical boots instead of leather dress shoes. Anyone dressing an extra could spot that anachronism. Stepping away from Dominic, she approached the map. Fear pulsed under her skin, but her analytical brain took over. "Wait," Clara Ara said, her eyes narrowing at the dining club's blueprint. She tapped her plump finger on the glass. "Dominic, how did the Calabrians know we were there?" That meeting was classified. "We're looking for the rat," Marco said defensively. "We're scrubbing communications." "You don't need to scrub communications," Clara Ara said, her voice deadly serious. "You need to look at the blocking." "The blocking?" Dominic asked. "The stage directions," Clara Ara explained. At dinner, Costa sat at the head of the table. You were to his right, I was to yours. His nephew, Lorenzo, sat directly across from me. Lorenzo. Dominic's jaw tightened. He's a fool, but he is Costa's blood. A fool in a badly tailored suit, Clara Ara agreed. But think about the timing. 5 minutes before the waiter came in with the gun, Lorenzo excused himself. Leo shook his head. So men used the bathroom. It's how the assassin entered. Clara Ara pressed. The fake waiter came through the service doors directly behind Lorenzo's chair. If Lorenzo had been sitting there, the assassin wouldn't have had a clear line of sight to Costa's head. He needed that specific chair empty to take the shot. The silence was heavy. The lieutenants stared at Clara Ara in shock. She wasn't looking at Mafia politics. She was looking at the basic logistics of a stage where every entrance had a mechanical purpose. Lorenzo cleared the sight line, Dominic whispered as the realization hit. The Calabrians had flipped Costa's air. Lorenzo had orchestrated the dinner as a trap. Dominic slammed his fist onto the table. Get me Costa on a secure line. Now Costa, a man of ruthless justice, didn't hesitate when presented with the logical breakdown of his nephew's movements. By noon, Lorenzo was dealt with. The leak was plugged, but the Calabrian bounty remained on Clara Ara's head. After the lieutenants filed out to execute defensive protocols, Dominic locked the doors. He walked over to Clara Ara, who was staring out at the skyline. I will tear the Calabrian syndicate apart brick by brick, Dominic said, stepping behind her. He wrapped his arms securely around her thick waist, pulling her comforting weight flush against his chest. Nobody hunts my wife. Fake wife, Clara Ara whispered. The fight leaving her voice, Dominic turned her around, his dark eyes blazing with overwhelming devotion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box holding the graph diamond. The 2 million was for the actress, Dominic said softly, brushing away her stray tear. But the ring is for the woman who saved my life. The fierce woman who doesn't ever need to shrink herself to fit into my world, because she was born to rule it. He dropped to one knee on the Persian rug. Keep the money, Clara Ara, Dominic murmured with unwavering reverence. Keep your theatre job if it makes you happy. I'll buy Broadway if I have to. But stay with me. Be my partner. Marry me for real. Clara Ara looked down at the most dangerous man in New York, offering her a kingdom. She smiled, a radiant expression lighting up the room. Only if I get to design my own wedding dress, Clara Ara demanded. Dominic let out a relieved laugh, pulling her into a bone-crushing kiss. "You can design whatever you want, Mia. Leona, the world is yours." 6 months later, the violent storm that had threatened to consume the East Coast underworld was nothing more than a memory. True to his word, Dominic had dismantled the Calabrian syndicate with a ruthless clinical precision that left his remaining rivals trembling in their bespoke suits. But while Dominic handled the brutal realities of his empire in the shadows, Clara Ara was busy orchestrating a completely different kind of hostile takeover in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, New York. She treated the wedding of the decade exactly like a multi-million-dollar Broadway production. And she was the undisputed director. Absolutely not. Clara Ara's booming voice echoed across the gilded empty ballroom, halting a team of panicked florists in their tracks. She pointed a manicured, plump finger at the massive floral arch being erected at the altar. "I ordered cascading white phalaenopsis orchids, not hydrangeas. Hydrangeas wilt under stage lighting. And if you think Dominic Moretti is getting married under dead flowers, you are sorely mistaken. Fix it." Leo, standing a few feet away with an earpiece and a clipboard, chuckled under his breath. The hardened Mafia enforcer had somehow been drafted into the role of Clara Ara's unofficial stage manager, and to his own surprise, he was thriving in the chaos. "You heard the bride?" Leo barked at the florists. "Get the orchids." Clara Ara turned away from the altar, adjusting the heavy silk of her emerald green rehearsal dress. Her confidence had only magnified over the last 6 months. She had not lost a single pound, nor had she tried to. She had moved into Dominic's Tribeca penthouse, bringing her vibrant, chaotic energy into his sterile, hyper-controlled world. She still worked on Broadway, designing costumes for a revival at the Gershwin Theatre, completely unbothered by the security detail that now accompanied her to wardrobe fittings. But today, the only garment she cared about was hanging in the bridal suite upstairs. "Clara Ara, darling, we really must discuss the foundation garments." A sharp, nasal voice whined from the doorway. Vivian Kensington, Manhattan's most exclusive and most terrifying bridal consultant, marched into the ballroom, holding a rigid, heavily boned corset. Dominic had hired Vivian as a gift to handle the logistics, but the woman had been a persistent thorn in Clara Ara's side, constantly trying to steer her toward slimming silhouettes and dark, muted rehearsal dinners. "Vivian, if you come near me with that torture device, I will have Leo show you exactly how the Moretti family handles insubordination," Clara Ara warned, not missing a beat. Vivian stopped, clutching her pearls. But Clara Ara, the flash photography, the press, a custom gown of that weight, requires structural support to minimize the waistline and flatter your proportions. Clara Ara walked slowly toward the consultant, the sheer unyielding force of her presence forcing the older woman to take a step back. "Listen to me very carefully, Vivian. I do not want to be minimized. I do not want an illusion. I am a fat, spectacular woman who is about to marry the most powerful man in this city. And I'm going to take up every single inch of the aisle. Put the corset in the trash." Vivian swallowed hard, practically tossing the garment onto a nearby chair before fleeing back to the lobby. 3 hours later, the doors to the St. Regis ballroom were sealed, and the absolute elite of the global underworld took their seats. Vincenzo Costa sat in the front row, a rare, genuine smile gracing his weathered face. He had flown in from Palmo, specifically to witness the union of the man he trusted and the lioness who had saved his life. The room was packed with KPOs, politicians, and Broadway producers. A bizarre, thrilling collision of Clarara and Dominic's two worlds. At the altar, Dominic stood waiting. He wore a flawless, midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo. But for the first time in his adult life, the city's most dangerous man looked visibly nervous. His hands, usually steady enough to execute a flawless hit, were clasped tightly in front of him. He kept looking at the heavy double doors at the back of the room, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then the string quartet shifted into a sweeping, dramatic arrangement of a classic overture. The heavy doors swung open, and the entire room collectively lost its breath. Clarara did not walk down the aisle. She commanded it. She had designed the dress herself, calling in favors from the master tailor in the theater district. It was a masterpiece of heavy, luminous ivory Duchess satin. The gown featured a dramatic, off-the-shoulder neckline that proudly displayed her lush curves and full cleavage cinched at her natural waist, before exploding into a voluminous, structured ball gown skirt, embroidered with subtle, shimmering gold thread. Instead of a traditional veil, she wore a magnificent sheer silk tulle cape that trailed 10 feet behind her, catching the draft and billowing like a queen's mantle. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked like a woman who owned the world. When Dominic saw her, the collective breath left his lungs. The hard, ruthless mask he wore for the world completely shattered. He took a step forward, completely abandoning protocol, unable to wait for her to reach him. Clarara smiled, her dark eyes locking onto his. She walked down the aisle to the man who had hired her for a fake dinner and ended up surrendering his entire empire to her. When she finally reached him, Dominic took her soft, plump hands in his callous ones. He didn't care about the hundreds of lethal men watching them. He didn't care about his reputation. "You are a vision," Dominic whispered harassingly, his thumb brushing over the heavy graph diamond on her finger, which now sat alongside a thick custom gold wedding band. "I don't deserve you." "I know," Clarara whispered back, a wicked, triumphant twinkle in her eye. "But you're going to spend the rest of your life trying." The priest began the traditional ceremony, but neither Clarara nor Dominic heard a single word. They were locked in their own universe, a universe built on a $2 million lie that had unexpectedly forged the absolute deepest truth. When it came time for the vows, Dominic didn't read from a script. "I spent my life in the dark, building walls out of fear and control," Dominic said, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom, raw and unshielded. "And then you walked in. You didn't just break down my walls, Clarara. You demanded a better room. You taught me that true power isn't about the fear you instill in others, but the love you are brave enough to protect. I am yours completely and forever." Clarara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't bother wiping it away. "You asked me to play a part, Dominic, but you never asked me to hide who I was. You gave me the stage, and you let me shine. I promise to be your partner, your equal, and the woman who will always spot the blade in the grass. I pronounce you husband and wife," the priest finally declared. Dominic didn't wait for permission. He pulled Clara Ara into his arms, his hands spanning her wide, glorious waist, and kissed her with a consuming, desperate passion that brought the entire room of hardened criminals and theater geeks to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. As they broke the kiss and turned to face their newly conquered kingdom, Clara Ara leaned her head against Dominic's broad shoulder. The fake wife had not just stolen the show. She had rewritten the entire script. And as the applause echoed off the crystal chandeliers, Clara Ara knew this was a run that would never close. Did you love seeing a fiercely confident plus-size heroine rewrite the rules of the Mafia and bring the city's most dangerous boss to his knees? If Clara Ara and Dominic's explosive love story kept you on the edge of your seat, we want to hear from you. Hit that like button and drop a comment below with your absolute favorite moment from the wedding. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, high-stakes audio dramas. Until next time, remember, never let anyone tell you to take up less.